is one thing. Okay, now we're ready to get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Tara O'Hanlon, and I am the Director of Early Childhood at the JCC in Dallas. And I am here with my JCC Dallas colleagues, my Bookfest colleagues, Rochelle Weiss-Crane and Adina Weinberg are on with me. And tonight's event is a partnership with the Goldberg Early Childhood Center and the Margot Rosenberg Pulitzer Dallas Jewish Bookfest. We also want to thank the Jewish Book Council for giving us this opportunity to connect tonight with our speaker. So speaking of our speaker, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Rebecca Hershberg to all of you. She is a clinical psychologist and parenting coach, and she is the founder of Little House Calls. She is known for her gift for speaking child. Dr. Hershberg has been published widely in the New York Times and on parents.com and Today's Parents. She's also been a featured speaker on many podcasts. Dr. Hershberg has a regular blog, Parenting While Human, on Psychology Today, and her first book, which I happen to have right here, is The Tantrum Survival Guide. Tune into your toddler's mind and your own to calm the craziness and make family fun again. This was published in 2018 to widespread praise. So Dr. Hershberg frequently gives talks and workshops for parents in school, community, and corporate settings, and is known for her engaging, pragmatic, and often humorous style. She currently lives in Dobbs Ferry, New York with her husband and her 2 young sons, both of whom keep her busier, though also smiling more than any of the above. And I was actually introduced to Dr. Hershberg's work through the Bookfest. She was actually supposed to be in Dallas today talking about her new book with all of us, and obviously couldn't be there. And since I got connected to that, Rochelle and Adina kept sending me her new blogs on Psychology Today, and all of the ones that I read that have to do with the COVID-19 and parenting through it really resonated with me because they're very real, they're very honest, and I found very approachable. So through all of this, I have become a big fan of Rebecca, and so I'm really excited to hear her talk tonight. I want to let you know that we will be answering questions after she talks, so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and we will ask the questions after. So it's really my pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Rebecca Hershberg.
Thank you so much, Tara, for the wonderful introduction. It's one thing I've had to get used to is in giving all these talks, not that I ever realized that I certainly don't need the applause when I'm introduced, but it's certainly the cue to start talking. And now I'm just introduced and there's sort of silence and I just get started. But it's just another way that we have to be flexible and pivot. And I'm just going to change this to gallery view if I can. Excellent. And I really like gallery view because I like seeing as many people as I can. And I also, from a sort of metaphorical or symbolic standpoint, the last thing Tara said about me, or close to the end, is that I'm a mom. I have 2 little boys, Henry and Zeke. They are 6 and 4. And I am right here in the trenches with you. I am not speaking to you this evening as an expert who has every single answer. I find the term parenting expert to be rather hilarious. Rather, I'm here certainly to share my professional expertise, but also just as one of you. And I'm going to speak from my personal experience as well, which is why I like gallery view, because then we're kind of all together. I was supposed to be in Dallas, and I just want to say quickly that I'm sorry not to be. It was obviously the wisest and best thing for everyone involved, but I've never been there. So I do hope to come another time. So I'm going to speak, as Tara said, for 20 or 30 minutes about what I consider to be some really major themes for families going on right now. Certainly my book and my primary work is in the area of toddlers and preschoolers. However, a lot of what I write about now and have been speaking about applies to families with kids of all ages. And these are the things that are on my mind that are coming up in questions and other talks I've given, coming up with my clients. And so I really hope they resonate, but then I'm absolutely going to leave a lot of time for questions because I want things to be relevant for the specific and particular people here listening this evening. So first of all, I want to just make it clear that we are in a collective trauma. And sometimes that's difficult to remember because unlike other traumas that we've heard about or potentially gone through as a country or world. This one is not sort of sudden and violent in the ways that we are potentially used to. And yet it's important to remember that the definition of a trauma is something that sort of affects our nervous system. It's too much for our nervous system, and it happens too quickly. And I think a lot of us feel like, wait a second, 2 months ago, I was, out to dinner with my friends, having a great time. And I never in a million years could have predicted that this is where we'd be now in such a short time, either because of my own personal kind of losses and experiences with the virus itself, or simply lifestyle changes and kind of being in quarantine. And so that is the definition of a collective trauma. And so I think it's important that we continue to remember that all of our nervous systems are still in some state, of heightened stress. And heightened stress doesn't always look like it does in the movies. It doesn't always mean that we're sitting there rocking back and forth and shaking or crying. It can mean that we're just distracted or disconnected. The example I've been using is that I left my earbuds in the fridge the other day. We're having difficulties finding words that we're looking for. We're just not quite fully at our best. And I think the same goes for our kids in a lot of ways. And again, in large part, that's because of what we're going through. And so I think it's important that we don't try to normalize these circumstances. I've heard a lot of people talking about, working from home or homeschooling my kids. That is not what's happening. We are quarantine schooling our kids. When you homeschool your kids, you've got access to the library, you've got access to museums, you can have play dates. That's not what we're doing. And similarly, when we work from home, we get to choose the day that it would be most relaxing to work from home, because perhaps we have a dentist appointment across town and our kids are at school. We're not working from home. We are attempting to get a little bit of work done so that we don't lose our jobs during a global crisis while we are locked in our houses against our will. And the reason that I frame it that way, it's potentially slightly hyperbolic, although not even, is because when we put those expectations on ourselves, both as parents and professionals and human beings, we then can hold ourselves to a bit of a lower standard. And I think that's one of the biggest take-home messages right now, is just to be easy on yourselves, be gentle with yourselves. None of us have done this before. None of us were prepared to do this. And so as parents, we often get into shame spirals about anything and everything. And right now, to the extent possible, and we'll talk about this more pragmatically, we just have to let that go. The number one thing our kids need from us right now, and I am not one to typically have singular right answers. I very much believe that every family is different, that you are the expert in your own kids, period, end of story. But this is something that is been borne out in the science so many times and so robustly that I can say it is an absolute truth, which is that the number one thing our kids need right now is a connection to you, their caregiver. That is undoubtedly the number one thing. There's been a ton of research looking at traumas, whether it's in an individual family or in a town, or after something like Hurricane Katrina or other natural disasters, or in war zones. And what separates kids who have a really difficult time long-term from kids who long-term end up being resilient and even thriving in a way, what separates those kids is the presence of an emotionally available caregiver. Truly, it's not the number of cool apps that you download. It's not the color-coded schedule that you have on your refrigerator with 15 different activities every Tuesday. It is the presence of a tuned-in caregiver. Now, when I say that, a lot of people feel a little bit of relief. Like, okay, so it's me. I have to be here. And then there's like this bit of recognition, like, pardon my language, like, oh shit. So like, it's me. And I snapped at my kid, 15 times today alone. I guess maybe that's not such good news. The fact is, the other thing that comes out over and over again in the research is the idea that a strong parent-child connection is characterized by rupture and repair. Rupture and repair. So breaks in the relationship and repairs in the relationship. And actually, there's been scientific studies conducted that have landed on an empirical number. So it basically turns out that you have to be, in order for your child to be in the group that ends up doing okay in a trauma such as this one, you need to be tuned in sync and connected with your child 30% of the time. That means that you can blow it 70% of the time. You have to find your way back, and we'll talk about that. You have to have the repair, but you can blow it 70% of the time. And so pressure is really, I hope, a little bit off in terms of just how much right now you need to be going above and beyond and holding yourself to unrealistic standards. Because really you need to be what's called, and what Dr. Winnicott, a very famous pediatrician, once called a good enough parent, now more than ever. So how do we respond during stress? This is a stressful time. I said we can be distracted, we can be anxious, our systems go into fight or flight. We all have a smaller window of tolerance. What does that mean? It means the window from kind of when something happens that might upset you to when you lose your mind about it completely. So, you know, your son or daughter might spill their water, and normally you have tolerance for that. But in this particular period, it's sort of like, oh man, ugh, you know, and you're like, oh, wow, I can't believe I reacted that strongly. He spilled his water. You know, we are all kind of in that hypervigilant state right now. What does this look like for our kids? Much the same. Our kids are not necessarily, some are, but most kids are not going to come to you and say that they are worried, that they are stressed, that they miss the structures of their lives, that they miss other caregivers they had, they miss the routine of school. Some may, and some of it depends on age, but many of them are going to show how they're feeling right now through their behavior. They're going to be irritable, they're going to be defiant, they're going to tell you you're the meanest mommy they ever had. They are going to communicate through their behavior right now, and they're going to be regressions. Regressions are very common right now. So what happens is a child has recently learned a skill, whether it's emotional regulation or pooping in the potty or speaking in full sentences. And what happens is that then the part of their brain that was devoted to learning this new skill suddenly has to get reallocated to dealing with the stress of what's going on. If you're 3, you're not necessarily aware of what that stress is, but suddenly everything is different. And everything you have to kind of get used to. Wait, I don't have my nanny and my school's canceled and I'm supposed to be doing this on the computer. And suddenly this skill that I learned, the part of my brain that was learning that skill and that was mastering that skill now goes to keeping it together. And so I lose that other skill. So kids who haven't peed in the bed for over a year are peeing in the bed. Kids who have had no issue going, let's say you live in a 2-floor house, going upstairs to their room to get something, don't want to go by themselves, right? You see real clinginess. You see, again, irritability. You see defiance when you weren't seeing that before. And that is likely all due to the stress. It's not a 5-alarm fire. It's not, oh my gosh, my kid is peeing, you know, in the middle of the night again, and that wasn't happening for so long. He's clearly so unbelievably stressed by this time. No, he's stressed by this time. And I've got news for you. Even if he wasn't showing you that through peeing in his bed, we could assume he was stressed by this time because we all are. And it's just a sign to up our support. So how do we kind of parent during this time? We go back to the 2 basics of parenting, which I talk a lot about in my book, although obviously not in the coronavirus context. We want to emphasize love. That's one L over here, and limits. That's the other L over here. Love and limits, the 2 L's. Decades and decades of research show that kids thrive when parents are high on both of those dimensions. And there is a misconception that when one of them goes up, the other has to go down. So if I'm being really loving and gentle and nurturing toward my child, then how could I possibly have any limits or expectations? Or similarly, if I need to set really clear, firm expectations with my kid and let them know what's going on, then how can I possibly be loving and warm at the same time? And the fact is, it doesn't go like this. They both need to be high. Now, right now, it's more important than ever to really, really hone in on this love piece. I'm going to get to limits, but the love piece, and love is obviously shorthand for connection. Connection, warmth, affection. As I said, that's going to be the number one protective factor for your kids right now. And so what does that look like? That looks like meeting your kids where they are. So if your children are frustrated, sad, angry because their birthday party was canceled, or they can't go to school, or, as is often the case with little kids, they can't find the right pajamas, or you ran out of the right kind of gummy snacks. The idea is that all of that, whether it's explicitly about this time or not, is this stress reaction. And the best thing we can do is kind of sit next to them and just let them feel what they feel. And that's so hard. I've had parents of high schoolers saying to me, how do I get my kid to realize that, even though prom is canceled and even though graduation is canceled, he still had a wonderful high school career? How do I get him to see the positive, to see the silver lining? And the answer is, you don't right now, because it's just going to distance you from him, because that's not where he's at. And then parents say, well, but I don't want my kid to wallow. I don't want my 17-year-old to wallow in that sadness. I don't want my 3-year-old to wallow in not finding the right pajamas. I want him to get his pajamas on and go to sleep. We don't cause our kids to wallow. And in fact, it's counterintuitive. If we meet our kids where they are, if we just join them in how they feel and let them know that we get it, they frequently move through it much, much faster, because our kids regulate, they calm down, their nervous system gets into sync when they feel our loving presence, right? And you can probably think of examples for yourself. I mean, I know for me, when I'm feeling really sad or mad or whatever it is, if my husband, for example, tries to jump in and solve it, or tell me what I'm feeling is no big deal and I should just sort of get over it and move on, or, that doesn't actually help. That makes me feel kind of like I'm being silly for being as upset as I am, and that maybe there is something wrong with me. And I start to feel ashamed, or I just start to feel really disconnected from my husband and angry with him. But either way, it doesn't actually address the issue as much as when he says or shows me, I get it. That sucks. And so I think that piece is incredibly important right now, being validating, being compassionate. We can speak more concretely if people have questions about what that looks like. The other thing that we want to think about kind of love and compassion and empathy for is when it comes to issues around discipline. And that's where kind of the limits piece comes in. And I have discipline in quotes because it's not a word that I love to begin with, especially with really little kids. I like to think much more, again, about setting limits is just the terminology I prefer. This is not a time to come down hard on our kids for things that we would consider misbehavior. That doesn't mean it's a time to let go of all rules and expectations, right? That's not the same thing. So sometimes when I say, look, this isn't a time, if your child calls you a really mean mommy, it's not the time to go in and talk about, respecting language, using more respectful language, or don't you talk to me like that. It's again, that's not going to work. It's going to distance your child from you, and that's your child trying to let out some kind of a big feeling. And then parents say to me, well, then how are they going to learn that it's not okay to speak to me that way? Well, right now, that's not why they're speaking to you that way, right? So the whole idea of consequences and rewards, it's like, well, I need to take me like that. Well, that assumes that the reason that they're going to stop talking to you like that is because they're going to get their thing back. But that's not actually what's going on. Our kids are talking to us that way right now, again, because they're having really big feelings in this really confusing, difficult time, and they don't know what to do with those feelings, so they lash out at us. And if we come back and try to discipline it with these behavioral techniques, we're just going to make their nervous system more dysregulated, because we're going to distance ourselves further. And so the way to kind of set limits right now, because it's not about, okay, okay, well, so then what am I supposed to do? Just let them stay up till 1 a.m. and eat pizza and be on their phone nonstop? And don't I set any rules? And the answer is yes. We set expectations this is where we can take an incredible cue from the amazing classrooms that our children typically attend, where they talk about kind of the classroom culture and classroom values, and they hang signs on the walls, and they remind kids throughout the day of what the expectations are. If they're all going to go into the hallway and it's an elementary school, they remind kids, remember, what do we do in the hallway? The same sort of thing. Let's talk first thing in the morning. Remind me, what do we do when mommy's on the phone? Remind me, what do we do when daddy's got that door closed? It's sort of on the front end, setting what the current expectations are, whether it's about a schedule, whether it's about behavior, it's about siblings getting along, whether it's about snacks, whether it's about screen time, whatever it is. If you're going to have kind of rules and schedules and policies around those things. And I say if, because for example, the family with 2 working parents who are holding on to their jobs with a threads are going to need to prioritize that and give their child an iPad all day long, right? And I just want to be clear, that's where your family. But to the extent that we can build in structure and predictability on the front end. And again, predictability doesn't look like necessarily, and if this is you, it's no criticism, I admire you. You've got the 15 color-coded, activities each day. But predictability can be, hey, so this morning, mommy has a lot of work to do. And so you're going to watch Frozen 2. And after Frozen 2, we're going to do 10 jumping jacks. And then we're going to have a sandwich. And then we're going to FaceTime grandma and grandpa. And then we're going to watch Frozen 2 again. Right? I mean, that's predictability. So it's not about content. It's not about the fact that you're watching Frozen twice instead of, reading great literature. It's about that you're letting your child know what's coming down the pike. And if your child can read, you can write it down. And if your child can't read, you can make pictures. And either way, you can keep saying it. But kids are visual learners. And so to the extent that you're just saying things over and over again and expecting them to take it in, again, think about your favorite classroom. Think about how many signs are on the wall, how many pictures are on the wall, and sort of take a lesson from them. Pragmatically, a couple of kind of techniques to go through, and then I do want to stop and address questions. There's so much that I could say on all of this, and again, I'm imagining that more will come out, but a couple of just very pragmatic, down-to-earth tools. One is, with connection being so important, how do you do that if you are stressed and busy and distracted and whatever else? And this was my most recent blog post, and I talked about just little tools like dressing the same as your child. If your child is little, if you have a little one, they love that. They love being twins. That'll float them for at least an hour. I've got a lot of work calls today, but I had the best idea. I'm going to wear a blue t-shirt. We wear a blue t-shirt and we'll be blue t-shirt twins. High five. This is awesome. Every time I look at my shirt, I'll know you have yours on. We're totally connected, right? Or you make something with your kid that then you can wear. I'm not wearing them right now, but my son made, we did clay baked earrings, or you make little bracelets, or a paper thing you can stick on your, chest and say, I'm going to do conference calls today, but I'm going to be wearing this paper thing. Or matching tattoos, matching Paw Patrol tattoos, Dora tattoos, like all those little things, even when you're not spending the time with your child because you actually have a lot to do, can really help them feel like you're connected. You can spend 20 minutes one evening, if you have note cards lying around your house, writing like 15 loving note cards to your kid that you then have on hand when you can't actually connect, either because you're in the middle of a Zoom call or you're just exhausted and you just don't have it in you. But you've got a pile of note cards that, again, kids love opening envelopes and seeing them. Or you make videos. This has been helpful for a lot of clients I have where it's 2 parents and the parents are kind of trading off during the day, balancing work schedules or whatever it is. And so one parent sends the other parent, 4 videos that parent can then play the next day during times that the other parent isn't there. Videos of you speaking in a funny accent, wearing a funny voice, telling a funny story, that sort of thing. So again, just some ideas for connecting when I say that that's so important, and yet I'm not naive enough to think everybody has like 2 hours to sit on the floor and like play dolls with their kid. Speaking of play, though, play is really important. And before I get to play, I'm going to just say one thing about the coronavirus specifically, which is that it's up to us to talk about it with our kids. We need to be the grown-ups. When we do not talk about something very important with our kids and they don't ask us about it, it is not necessarily because it's not on their minds. It's because they take our cues from us and not the other way around. And so our kids have all heard the term coronavirus. They're familiar with it. They know their lives have extraordinarily, changed because of the coronavirus. You can explain it in really, really simple terms if your child is very little, and you can add more information depending on how old your child is, although I would keep it short, sort of bite-sized pieces of information. But it's important to keep checking in about it. Because again, just because your child isn't telling you that they're stressed about it or that they have questions doesn't mean that they don't. And check-ins, I think, with most kids, again, not all kids, you know your kids best. Most kids, the formal check-ins don't work all that well. Like, so how are you feeling about not being at school? Or, so do you have any questions about coronavirus? Most of the time that doesn't work. What works is just sort of throwing a pebble in a pond, like planting the idea that it is safe to talk about things. So while you are unloading the dishwasher, saying something like, man, I really miss hanging out with my friends. I've been talking to them on the phone, but it's not the same. And then you're modeling that it's okay to have those feelings. And then they may say something right then and there, or they may wait a day or two, or they may not say anything. But again, you have communicated it is safe to have all your feelings here. And you can do that with sadness, with anger, with fear, any of that stuff. If your child is someone who's asking a lot of questions, over and over again, is grandma going to get it? Is grandma going to get it? Is grandma going to get it? Recognizing that that's worry. And I don't have time to do a whole thing on worry, which is a whole separate topic, but the idea is that kids seek reassurance and they come to us wanting verbal information, and we end up wanting to give it to them, but it doesn't actually help. What helps when kids are worried is talking about the worry itself. You've asked that question 3 times and I've answered it. It seems like worry is getting into your brain. What can we do with this worry? Well, let's just sit with the worry, because worry actually passes if you let it be there. Or let's get into our bodies. Worry likes it when we're in our heads. Let's move our bodies a little bit, or let's have some water. Sometimes water, just when we feel that cold sensation in our throats, the worry gets a little smaller, right? So it's those sorts of techniques that we can guide our kids to. Play. Kids love playing, creative, imaginative play. If you have the time, if you have the bandwidth. My son turned 6 during the quarantine virus, and he was, perfectly awesome when we told him that we'd have to cancel his birthday party. He was mature and kind and, completely, yes, that's the best thing to do. And then the next morning he came down the stairs and he said, Mommy, I have some really bad news. And I said, honey, what's going on? And he said, well, and he was holding his little baby doll. He said, well, my baby has coronavirus. And I was so tempted, like so many parents, to just be like, don't get coronavirus. What are we having for breakfast? Let's have some cereal, la, 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 just completely avoid it. But our kids need to play. And so I said, oh, well, what are we going to do? I'm sorry to hear your baby has coronavirus. What are we going to do? And he took the baby, it was luckily rubber, and he spiked it to the ground like a football as hard as he could. And he said, that's what I'm going to do. He was mad. Right? He hadn't been able to tell me, the day before when we were talking about his birthday party, but the next day he told me through play. And so that opened up a whole conversation about being angry at the coronavirus. And we yelled, we hate the coronavirus. Go away, stupid coronavirus. And it was really helpful. Kids have made, magic witches spells to chase away the virus. Or I have a client whose daughter keeps dressing up as Elsa and trying to freeze the coronavirus in its tracks, and it makes her feel better. Our kids need to do this. And that's, I'm going to sort of end on this point, which is that helping our kids feel like they have agency right now, that we are fighting the virus. We're not just sort of staying home and being told what to do in this passive way, but we are fighting as a community together against this new bad guy in town, if you will. We are washing our hands. We are wearing masks, which is awesome, because guess who wear masks? Superheroes, right? We are superheroes, but we can't go to school right now. But it's so, the reason we're not going to school is because we're doing our job. We're fighting this bad guy by staying home. I know it just feels totally lame and boring, and all you want to do is eat snacks and watch TV, but we're actually fighting the virus. And similarly, we can emphasize community, all the people in our communities who really need help more than we do, and what we can do to help them, and writing letters or writing thank you letters to the essential workers, that sort of thing. I could go on forever about these and many other points. I didn't get into kind of remote learning, or there's a lot of sort of topics that I hope will come up in the questions. But I'm going to stop there. And Tara, what's on people's minds?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, that was really great, Rebecca. I just really appreciate the realness. Those of us, I'm a mom of 4 kids and experiencing a lot of that at home, and just appreciate what's best for your family. So we've had some good questions come in over the chat. One of them is about the handling regression. So let's say your child is regressing and sleeping in your bed now for 2 weeks. How should you handle that? Should you try to get them out of your bed? Should you just let it be? What's your thoughts on how to handle the regression?
Yeah, well, first of all, you are not alone. Many, many, many people have new sleep buddies right now. And I think there's actually no right or wrong answer. And that's sort of not a cop-out. It's just to say that it's important to be kind of thoughtful about your kid and your family. There are a lot of kids who are not getting as much of their parents as they need during the day. And getting that comfort from them at night is actually what they need to feel okay and feel nurtured. And the child is getting sleep and the parents are getting sleep, and it's kind of just not a big sacrifice for everyone, and the child seems otherwise well regulated. And I don't think there's any problem with that. At some point, you will certainly want to move your child back to his bed, but when that is, again, I think that's a pressure we don't need on ourselves now. It may be, again, especially if you think about your home and you think about maybe that you and your partner are always working during the day, and it's actually adaptive that your child kind of is able to capitalize on your warmth and your comfort during the nighttime hours. Other families, it really isn't working for them. The child is, in their bed at night but won't let them leave the room. And then parents never get time to themselves, which they really need to decompress. And the child is kicking all night and no one is sleeping, which obviously doesn't set up success for the next day, in which case there's a child that it seems like for the sake of the whole family, it would make sense to try to transition them back to their bed. And even in that case, I would do it in a sort of gentle and compassionate way. And we can, that sort of gets into sleep stuff that's a little bit, more afield. So again, in none of the cases would I kind of rigidly be like, back to your bed tonight and cry it out. Like, I just don't think now is the time to do that. But I think what your ultimate decision is in terms of whether the kid's in your bed or not is sort of up to you and where your family's at.
Okay, and then adding to that, if the bedtime keeps getting later and later, any suggestions on how to get it back to a normal earlier time?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's some families whose schedules have kind of switched a little bit, just because no one has to leave at a certain time in the morning. And, and again, I would look at like, well, before I sort of freak out that my child's going to bed at 9, like, is it actually working better? And is my child still getting the sleep they need? And does, because I think we can somehow panic, but not realize that the adjustment is okay. But I think the important thing is your child getting sleep? And a lot of times kids get really, really cranky when they're not getting enough sleep. And the way to move it back generally is sort of like 15 minutes a day. So like if wherever you're starting bedtime now is landing you an hour later than you want it to be, to sort of start 15 minutes earlier and see where that goes. And again, I think kids need right now, they need clear limits and expectations, but they need it communicated to them like, you can do this. And again, I'm going to stay connected. So here's something really, special of mine that you can sleep with. Or I'm going to say goodnight now because it's so important that your body and your brain get the sleep it needs, but I'm going to come back and check on you. I'm going to come back and check on you every 5 minutes and give you a little kiss on your forehead till you're sleep. So again, there's ways of setting limits, but again, with the limit being here, but also the love and the warmth being here.
Great, thank you. So someone is asking about the 70-30 statistic, which I also thought was So interesting and kind of a relief. So they're asking, is the 30% of being present 30% of each day? Is that how you measure it? They're wondering.
No, so this is based on, and then there were many studies that sort of replicated it with kids at sort of different ages, but it was based on studies, I believe, out of Harvard with babies, and kind of really tracking microseconds of how much babies were kind of in tune with their caregiver based on like facial expressions. And they did the same with toddlers and so on and so forth. But no, so it doesn't have to do with being physically present. It has to do with being emotionally in sync. So for example, when I used to work at a hospital and I would look at the waiting room in pediatrics, sometimes moms would have these toddlers on their laps and they would be laughing with them and, laughing and tickling them and holding them and snuggling them. And of course that sounds great, but you also have to look at the child. And if the child is kind of squirming and wanting some space and sort of just giving mom this cue of like, this is just not what I need right now. Mom, I'm saying mom, but I mean dad or caregiver. Mom needs to be able to pick up on that and be responsive. So sort of responsive parenting is what needs to be in place 30% of the time. And it's kind of like, am I reading my kids' cues right? So you may not even be, you may be in different rooms, but everybody's in a good place. Like you've arranged that you're going to be in different rooms and she's doing her learning and you're doing your work, but like, so it's more about that 30% of the time kind of emotionally in sync and being responsive. And then 70% of the time where that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we have a couple questions about sibling fighting. So people who are saying now they're in close quarters, that usually they sort of let the fighting go and let them deal with it, but the screaming and yelling only makes the stress levels for everyone in the house get harder and louder. So any advice on sibling fighting?
So before I give advice, just some compassion right there. It's so hard. I mean, just again, I know I started this way and I'll end this way, but I'm going to just throw it into the middle. It's just so hard. What we're going through is so hard. And it's hard for them, and siblings are a really complicated relationship anyway. And they're always in competition for mom and dad's attention. And right now that's kind of even more so. I think, again, the best way to accomplish anything right now is to really approach it on the front end. So again, having a daily, certainly a weekly, but then even a daily, like a morning meeting to just kind of set the scene of expectations and really talking about when everybody is in a good mood. Maybe you do it over chocolate chip pancakes or, ice cream for breakfast, like something zany and wacky, but just sort of when everybody's in a good mood and you're having a warm moment to say, here's what I really, really need from you guys. How can we make this happen? And again, it depends on the ages of the kids. If they're really little kids, you're going to obviously need to be a lot more involved. But I get the sense if you were willing to let them work it out themselves before this time, they might be a little bit older. And it might be sort of coming up with a sibling contract and having them sign the contract and having them have their own ideas. Or, is there enough space in the house where they can actually leave each other alone? Could it be the type of thing where they themselves are tasked with noticing when they each might need a break, and really, again, can you put in that time in the beginning before things go awry, rather than giving them so much attention? Because again, it's sort of like, oh, that takes so much time and effort. Yes. But then hopefully less time and effort each time that, the incidents happen less and less. And so ultimately you end up kind of saving time and energy because you're not having to get so frustrated.
What about advice on dealing with neighbors who are not respecting the social distancing rules and trying to explain to your child why they can't go play with the other ones?
I got that question when I was giving a virtual talk in Houston the other day. I feel like someone's got to, tell these Texans they got a social distance. But that's, so I think it's, the good news is that itself is not a new problem, right? Different families have different rules. And so I wouldn't, throw your neighbors under the bus. They may be your neighbors for a long time. I wouldn't say that, you very much disapprove of their way of dealing with things, but I would just say, look, it is our job as your mom, as your dad, to keep you guys safe. That is our number one job in the whole wide world. And the best way for our family to do that right now, we are listening to the news. We are, is to follow this guideline of social distancing. Other people can make decisions for their families. We're not always going to agree. And I would kind of leave it at that. And they may say, oh, but that stinks. They get to have play date. Yeah, it totally stinks. I get it, but we're not, we are following these rules because we feel like it's incredibly important for safety.
What about a 3-year-old who's been acting like a baby? They also have a baby at home, so it could be jealousy. Should the mom is wondering, should she just love on him as the baby or set an expectation of what he does as a big boy?
So that is the most kind of explicit regression that we're seeing right now. It's like they don't even need to act like they just literally, kids start acting like babies and they're talking in baby talk, or they're wanting a bottle. My son, I breastfed, and he's 4 and I haven't breastfed in years, but he's like been talking a lot about, well, is there still milk in your boobies? They have being a baby on the mind, because it was a really nice nurturing time for them, and they get that. And so they are wanting that. And if your daughter is acting like a baby, either in this virus context or in the context of a new sibling, both of which are valid, and it turns out for you impossible to parse because they're happening at the same time, I think it's actually a really adaptive way to ask for what she needs. She's saying, I need some baby love. And I would play it with her. I would play baby, and if she says, pick me up, or, oh, my little baby, I miss when you were a baby. And even sometimes saying to a 3-year-old, and I miss when you were my only baby. I love your sister or your brother to the moon and back, but sometimes I miss the way it was before. And a lot of times, if you really, again, just meet your child where they are, and give them what they need, that behavior dissipates over time in a much more effective way than stop acting like a baby, stop acting like a baby. And here's the other thing, because I got this question the other day too. Sometimes you can say to your child, oh, but you're a big kid, and so you get to do all these things that your baby sister or baby brother doesn't, stuck in our houses. So that doesn't really buy you that much right now. I might save that for when you can say like, oh, we get to go out and have ice cream. So I would mostly just sort of give in to that right now. I don't think if you do, it's going to be all the time. And if it is all the time, I don't think that's going to last for more than a day or two. I think that the more you just meet her need, the less she's actually going to need that.
All right, so let's shift to school, virtual learning, homework, all of those things. How much should parents be pushing their children to attend the Zoom meetings, do their homework at night when they're just refusing and not really wanting to do it? So my priority, very transparently, is mental health. And my strong belief is that always has to come first. I also think that we know from brain science and brain development that when we are in very activated states, we actually don't learn. And you can, think about that. Think about when you're, really anxious or angry and you're trying to write an email and it takes like 10 times longer than it would because you're distracted and you're doing typos and you can't, So I think in some ways it's a little bit of a false dichotomy in the sense of like, if you are forcing your child to sit at the computer when they really don't want to, or forcing them to do homework, and it's becoming this really unpleasant sort of power struggle, tempers flare, they're not going to do what you want them to do anyway, because they're not going to be capable of doing it. So I think, what I would say about remote learning, and obviously it really differs depending on the age of the kids. I think, when I've been giving talks to preschool parents exclusively, and I have the preschool director attending, everyone has agreed, that preschooler, it's not, if they can do it and they like doing it, great. If they can't do it, the expectation can't be that they'll do it. I mean, sitting in front of a computer for a little kid is really hard, and especially a little kid, and especially right now, who thrives on connection. It's not very connected, especially, and they get confused with the muting and the not muting, and can my teacher see me or hear me? And so,
again, if you have a little kid, I might kind of practice using the technology with them at another time. But it's sort of getting to the bottom of what's going on. Is it that your kid is just really frustrated and angry that he can't go to regular school and therefore doesn't want anything to do with it? Is it that your kid specifically doesn't want to do the math because the math is really hard? Again, it depends on the age of your kid. I think undoubtedly keeping things kind of sane at home and calm at home and being on your child's side is without a doubt the first priority. And then again, if the learning is problematic and your child is older than preschool, sitting down with them again on the front end and just saying, what can we do? Like, I really don't like nagging you and yelling at you. I know you really don't like slamming your door, like let's talk about this. And maybe you come up with a set time of day they're going to do it, or they'll do it with a snack, or they don't like doing it in their room. They promise they'll be quiet. They'll do it next to you while you're checking your email, and you'll do it together. So again, it's like working with them to figure out how to get the most out of it.
So we have someone asking who has 2 young children, any magical advice on finding the patience to provide the continuous love and care for our kids? Being with them continuously is beyond exhausting in every way.
Yes, it is. It is beyond exhausting in every way. If you are in a 2-parent family, and I think I heard the pronoun we, tag teaming in some way, even just giving one parent a half an hour break, I think is really important. I think being a lot more liberal than you might be inclined to be with screen time. Because screen time will give you a break. And I promise it is worth, if you are going to have more patience with your kids and be able to enjoy your kids more, if you give them double the screen time they're having right now, that is worthwhile. And the screen time experts out there, by the way, have all weighed in that now is not a time to be stressing about so much screen time. There are a few who cannot be reached for comment, as I heard on NPR, and that just made me laugh. But the screen time rules are all kind of, and again, many people grew up watching a lot of TV and ended up being just fine. When we're thinking about screen time, we can differentiate it. Having time on tablets is different from TV, and then there's different content, right? So not all screen time is created equal. But I really think, first of all, lowering your expectations. You're not going to be sort of loving and patient with your kids all day long. It's not, you're going to get irritated with them. You're going to be impatient with them. You're going to snap at them. And again, that's all okay. And you can repair, whether it's explicit, apologies or tickles or whatever it is. And then really figuring out how to get your own needs met. And sometimes it's as easy as like, oh, wow, it turns out I hadn't even realized I haven't been eating lunch. Like, clearly I just need a sandwich in the middle of the day and that'll make everything better. I mean, it's really thinking that basically right now, because those are the ways in which our nervous systems are so shaky that we're forgetting those types of basic self-care needs. So yes, I agree. It's exhausting, and do what you need to take care of yourself.
So we have someone saying they are hoping summer camps will be available, but if they're not, what advice do you have for summer months when remote learning ends and parents are working?
Someone asked me on a talk like this the other day, do you think camps will be open? I was like, that's not why I'm here. I don't have an inside, inside connection. We are all praying, obviously, that camps are open. I think, again, if parents are working, there's a ton of remote activities that so if your kids are into remote learning, and I get the sense they kind of are, because it sounds like that'll be a big shift for your family, there's a million different remote offerings. There's remote classes if your kids are into robotics, or I saw one the other day about insects offered by the American Museum of Natural History. I mean, if you just go down a Google hole, you can find a million different things for your kids to do on the computer. And then there's also, depending what your kids are into, get a bunch of art supplies or get science experiments, or it's a question of just finding them ways to occupy themselves at home. If you have any flexibility in your job schedule and can just get them outside, or if you live in a place where they can just even hang out in the yard. I think that's a really important piece as the weather gets warmer. That said, I'm not an expert in Dallas weather, so maybe it's warm there already. I realized that as I was saying it. So yeah, I mean, again, I think there's no magical advice on that one. It's just finding ways to occupy your kid and also letting them be bored a little bit. I mean, that's the other thing. And thinking about, okay, your camp is canceled. Let's take 4 weeks. What do you want to learn? Is there something you want to learn? Is there something you want to do? Do you want to create a camp for yourself? Again, though, lowering expectations, it's not ideal for anyone.
What about, do you have any advice for single parents who are kind of doing this on their own, who feel like they're pouring from an empty bucket on most days already?
Yeah, it's so, and that's why I'm very conscious. Some of the suggestions that I've made thus far, I'm always conscious to say, if you are in a two-parent family, because it really makes a world of difference. And so, I get it. Being in a single parent household, it's just you as an adult, and I don't know the age of your child or children. I think a lot of the connection activities that I mentioned are particularly great for single parents. The sort of dressing as twins, maybe, each night after the kids are in bed, can you set up like, again, the note cards I mentioned, but like you can hide them in special places for them. You can put Post-its in their bathroom. Like, it's sort of like what I would think about, what can I do even if I'm not going to be able to be physically present for my kid or really have the reserves for my kid? Can I take an hour after they go to bed each night? It's like the summit dash. All you want to do is, sit on the couch, maybe have a glass of wine but can you take that hour and just think about what are their sort of cute, special things I can plan for them tomorrow so that they'll feel connected to me? Can I leave out some old pictures of us? Can I, while I'm working? So I think really like thinking about your time in that way, and then figuring out, are there possible people that you, again, depending on the age of your kids, that you can call on for FaceTime, to be with your kids over FaceTime, depending on their ages? Are there grandparents who can? I have a client who's who is a divorced parent, and the dad is a physician or retired physician. And so like he's teaching the kids some about like anatomy, on Zoom every day. That's, one of those idyllic, like, I don't think everybody necessarily has that at their disposal, but thinking, do you have a friend? Do you have a cousin? Do you have somebody who just for a little bit of time a day can entertain your kid on the computer, even if it's just by like making funny faces and putting on funny hats and makeup?
One more question from the crowd, and then a few other little quick things. Is this going to be considered like a collective trauma for all the children going through it? And they're wondering, how's that looking long term? Does it matter what age they are, trauma-wise?
So that is a great question. So the answer is yes. By definition, if you look up the definition of a collective trauma, it is this, meaning that we are all together experiencing this global pandemic. However, it used to be that when we define trauma from a psychological standpoint, we define the event. So, war was traumatizing, or sexual assault was traumatizing. And now we know that actually, even in those cases, it depends on the individual person's nervous system. So there are people that go through active combat and are not traumatized. And we look at kind of what are the differences in people's resilience when they undergo trauma. So I think, the answer to your question is a little bit more complicated. Yes, this is a collective trauma by definition, but no, not all kids will be traumatized at all. And you asked about age. Age may be a factor. Certainly, there's no question in anyone's mind that socioeconomic status and race are factors. We are seeing that, very much in New York. But the factor that if this collective trauma is going to resemble others in any way, the number one protective factor is going to be the presence of an emotionally tuned in caregiver. My guess would be, and I wouldn't, I'm not going to put money on, my guess would be that if you are here listening to this talk, chances are your kids won't be traumatized because you have the time, energy, knowledge, education, motivation, ambition, access to listen to this talk. That said, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but hopefully a comfort nonetheless.
So I am wondering, so I, like I said earlier, have loved reading your blogs and things like that. I especially like your fridge lists. Do you want to tell everybody about your refrigerator lists and how they can find those and things like that? It's a great tool.
Sure, thank you. So when it was the first, I think, blog post that I wrote for Psychology Today about COVID-19, and I called it Parenting, and I'd read a lot of different things about it, but I hadn't seen anybody just kind of bullet it out. And so I wrote, tips for parenting during COVID-19, a bulleted list you can print out and put on your refrigerator, if anybody still does that. And so it's, I think, I don't remember, 20 points or 15 points. And then I wrote a part 2, much of which we've gone over this evening, but it's just in these short bite-sized pieces. You can print it out, put it on your fridge, or carry it around as just reminders. And you can find those on Psychology Today. So if you Google me, so my website is littlehousecalls.com. And I do, not only talks like this, but also individual sessions remotely with people all over. So if anybody feels like they need extra support in any of these realms, I'm available. But also Little House Calls, at Little House Calls, is where I am on social media. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And I always post there if I have a new blog post, or if I do a podcast or an interview, or whatever it is. But if you go to my website, littlehousecalls.com, and if you go, there's a media tab, and if you click on that, there will be there's a part for the book, a part for press, which will have all different kinds of podcast interviews and whatnot, and then blog. And blog will take you to the Psychology Today blog.
So if people are interested in more support or reading more of your things, really going to littlehousecalls.com will be the central zone for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Rebecca, this has been really great, really helpful, practical tips, very realistic and helpful for me. And I know for so many people out there, and I am going to save the comments for you because there's so much that people have written in here about just the science and how you're explaining things so easily, and they're feeling a little bit better after listening to you talk. So that just makes it all worth it for me right there. So I'm going to turn it over to Adina, who's going to tell everybody where they can buy your book and how you can find out more information and all of that. But I just really thank you for taking time, because it's an hour later in New York. So we really appreciate you staying up late for us, especially being a full-time working mom. We know how hard that is. So thank you.
Thank you. This has been a real pleasure. So I really appreciate it. And the fact that we could pivot to online, but next time in Dallas.
Next time in Dallas. Exactly. Thank you so much.
Dallas, this was fantastic.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Absolutely. I just want to repeat Tara and Rochelle and say thank you so much. This has been, I'm not a mom, but this has been amazing and really fascinating. And so I just wanted to encourage everyone to purchase Dr. Herschberg's book. We have a link posted on the JCC website. If you go to jccdallas.org/book, and then to this specific event, you can access the link from there. And then also just remind you all that we have several more virtual Bookfest events coming up, and our next one is actually tomorrow at 3 p.m. Our cookbook author, Paula Scheuer, will be doing a quarantine soup, make it at home while she's on Zoom. So please join us, and more information about that is also on our website. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again, Rebecca.